We've focused on a Brandon Ingram trade, but there could be big shakeups to the Pelicans coaching and front office staff. I'll tell you the latest news and why it really matters with the NBA Combine going on right now in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans and NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter, here with y'all on this Tuesday. We focused a lot on trades. We talked about that yesterday with the draft lottery kind of going the Pelicans' way towards facilitating, I think, a Brandon Ingram deal. But there's bigger shakeups. It doesn't just have to be on the player side. It can be on the coaching staff and the front office. And this time of year, that's really important. I'm going to tell you why in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast, coming to you like nobody else does, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, with the topics that you want to hear and why it matters to the team you love the most. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. If you're an everydayer, that means you listen Monday through Friday, and I appreciate y'all so much. We got some great stuff coming, so you definitely want to become an everydayer wherever you get your podcast. We're like right there. When I'm recording this, we're like 10 people away from 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. So hit that. I can do the whole like streamer thing. Hit that, smash that like button, get the notifications, the bell, all that stuff. I don't need to do that for you here. We're just going to talk Pelicans. Simple as that. So let's get into it now. And let's start with the coaching staff, because I think that's what's most interesting here and a part that I think people maybe misunderstand a little bit. So this comes from Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN. James Borrego, the new addition to the coaching staff this past season, while the Los Angeles Lakers are contacting/interviewing him for their open head coaching position. Would this be a big loss? Does this matter to the Pelicans? I'm going to be honest. The answer is both yes and no to that question. Borrego was brought in to run a different kind of offense, to kind of revitalize it, reinvent it, and at times make it less Zion-centric. It didn't really work this year overall, though. The Pelicans finished 11th in terms of offensive efficiency, and that's a good number, but getting there was just a pain at times, and we saw them not even crack 100 points at any point during the postseason, having one of the worst playoff offenses in like a decade. They really struggled at times. They couldn't come back from fourth quarter deficits, anything like that, because they struggled to score. That's, to me, not the most glowing endorsement of James Borrego. That said, I don't really think it was his fault on a lot of this. I really don't think it was his fault. Look, I can boil this down to being very simple here. You're going to lose if your best players don't play. And when you don't have Zion Williamson in the postseason, it's going to be tougher to score. It's really as simple as that. Look what happened to the Milwaukee Bucks in the playoffs this year. No Giannis, no Dame, really, and you lose. Look at the Knicks right now, being a little bit in trouble in this series that they should be winning. They're the 2 seed. They're tied with the Pacers because the Knicks are banged up and injured. They don't have Julius Randle, and Anunoby's not playing. If you're missing your best players or your best player, it makes your offense tougher to score, and you're going to lose games. Sometimes it's as simple as that. And unfortunately, New Orleans has been bit with the bad injury luck more than a lot of other teams. But the greatest offensive scheme isn't going to overcome a lack of talent. It just won't, not in today's NBA. So if you're missing guys, I don't know, you're going to lose. It's kind of as simple as that. Breaking analysis here. That is why you should subscribe to Locked On Pelicans. I'm kidding, but you get what I'm saying. So the team tried to kind of avoid some of that, to be perfectly honest. That's why a lot of what Borrego was brought in to do. And if you watch them for the first month or two, they went with a less Zion-centric approach. They tried to build an offense, and this is the challenge of developing an offensive identity, whatever word you want to use, that didn't rely solely around Zion Williamson, right? Point Zion is called Point Zion because it's him, right? And Point Zion is truly just using his court gravity to draw two defenders to him and then have him kick out to open shooters. Real easy offense, right? It works. It works. Don't get me wrong. But if Zion's not playing, you can't do that. No one can kind of replicate that. That's a problem. So they tried to make an offense that was its own thing, not Zion-centric. And it didn't go particularly well. You know, you heard the earlier comments in the year from Zion Williamson saying, he's like, I'm struggling to adapt to a different role. I'm trying to find my way. And that offense often just parked him in the corner. He's not a corner three-point shooter. That offense, well, I get the idea of doing something that's like insurance in case Zion Williamson gets injured. And, you know, until the season, he hadn't proved that he can be healthy. So it's not necessarily an incorrect decision. If you're not running an offense that makes the best use of your best players, I don't know if that's the way to go. And we saw the Pelicans really look out of sorts and not particularly good in the playoffs or in the regular season, in the beginning of the regular season because of this. They also just didn't really get the buy-in from Brandon Ingram like you would have liked. This is something that I've talked about and a lot of others have talked about too. So Borrego can come in with this revolutionary offense, but if the players aren't going to do it or be healthy to run it, it don't matter, right? Like, and that's why I say, would losing Borrego be a big loss? And I say yes and no. He's a good coach. He's a good offensive mind, and he can come up with a lot of things that you want to see. But if the players aren't going to do it because they're not healthy or because they just won't buy in, because they don't want to, whatever, it does you no good. And I think that's kind of what you saw. The offense was not good this year despite finishing 11th. That was kind of Zion Williamson willing them. When they went on their runs and had stretches where they looked unstoppable, it was Point Zion and Zion doing Zion things. That is not sustainable if Zion gets hurt. But I also think that's the case for any team and their best players, right? So if you have that, I don't know if it's wrong to lean into that and it's just, okay, they went down, what can we do? So losing him, yeah, is significant in the sense that he's a smart offensive guy with head coaching experience that I think is important for Willie Green to have on the bench. But at the same time, maybe you just need someone that the players will like freaking listen to. There's good and bad with potentially losing him. So there would have, some guys replacements. That means there's going to be a potential shakeup to the bench yet again. Maybe another offensive scheme coming in as they try and kind of figure out what they want to do. But with the combine and the draft and trades coming up, having that guy kind of in place, I think, is important. More on this in the third segment when we look at the combine a little bit, and particularly in the next segment when we talk about Trajan Langdon and where he could end up. And that one I do think is a big loss for this team potentially. But this is the time of year where you're starting to make your summer plans. If you want to run a certain kind of offense, you might need players that fit that. Well, you want to go and trade for those guys, so you need to know what it is. Otherwise, that might be holding up a Brandon Ingram trade or something along those lines too. So figuring this out and then getting the hire potentially, if Borrego leaves, and I don't know if he's the front runner or anything like that. If he ends up leaving, though, you need to have those plans in place right away so that you can act. And that's, I think, a really important thing. But you also are going to need to draft somebody. And things, by the way, in the combine are kind of looking good for New Orleans, in my opinion. More on that in the third segment. But let's look at Trajan Langdon and his rumored links to the Detroit Pistons. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans because I think losing him would be a very big loss. That's coming up here next. Right now, though, I'm excited to tell you about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. If you think the Celtics are going to run away with this series because Donovan Mitchell's not playing, you can get him on the money line. You can take the points or the spread, whatever it is you're looking for here, or just the player props. Go put a $5 bet down. If you win, you get $150 to bet even more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count right now. Make the playoffs more interesting for you. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon to get $150 in bonus bets if you have that $5 winning bet. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and the official sportsbook of Locked On. Right now, though, I also want to invite you to the NOLA Star Bar. Right down the street from the Smoothie King Center for all your pre- and post-game libations. They play every Pelicans home and away game throughout the season on their big screen. They're also going to have the playoffs on. So if you just want to go watch some great NBA basketball, they're going to have it for you. There's also a pool table, video poker, an internet jukebox, and karaoke, which I love, every Wednesday night. They also feature over 100 worldwide spirits and a hefty selection of local beers. A true Pelicans fans bar. They even created and produced the Pelicans anthem Fly Pelicans Fly, complete with a music video. So join your fellow Pelicans fans at NOLA Star Bar at 212 Loyola Avenue, open 7 days a week, 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. You can stay out late. Check out their Pelicans anthem on the NOLA Star Bar page on YouTube as well. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team, looking at the trade scenarios around Brandon Ingram, looking at little things that matter to this team, though, the coaching staff changes. We're going to talk about Trajan Langdon in the front office and how it's going to really impact them going forward. Like starting today is how important I think that's going to be. We fill you in here on Locked On Pelicans. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join almost, maybe at this point when I'm recording, 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. That's an incredible number because we don't cover Saints. We don't look at anything else. We just look at this team here, and it's a whole lot of fun, and that is just the passion coming out from all y'all. So I absolutely love it. So please subscribe on YouTube as well. Two things before we get into the next part with Trajan Langdon. We're going to do a live show Wednesday night. The way I do these is do just the normal show. We'll probably look at a Brandon Ingram trade, maybe with Atlanta, I think, and then do a bonus segment after where I interact with the people in the chat as well. And then it just kind of gets posted to YouTube. And then on the podcast side, if that's where you listen, it's just the normal show. So that's going to be a lot of fun. That's going to be Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Central is the tentative plan here. We'll also do something when we hit 10,000 subscribers, that's the word I'm thinking of, on YouTube as well. I think it maybe will just be like a full hour-long bonus show where I interact with the chat the whole way through, and we can pick a date for that for everyone, even if it's like a weekend or something like that during the day, whatever it is that everyone wants to see. Final thing, we're going to do the community mock draft. We did this a couple of years ago. I don't think I had time to do it last year, where what we did was got basically like 30 listeners. I assigned everybody a team, and we just did a mock draft. No trades or anything like that. Just first pick makes their pick. Second team makes their pick. If you get a team and they have multiple picks, you handle all of the picks in that draft. There is a link in the description down below. I'll also pin it as a comment on the YouTube page. Fill that out so I get your name, your email, your Twitter handle so we can set this all up. Should be a lot of fun. I want to try and get everyone set within the next week or two, and then we'll do the community mock draft. And I read it all on here. We turn it into a show or two, so it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it. Okay, let's get into the stuff with Trajan Langdon because I think this is a really big deal. It's draft season right now. The NBA Combine started yesterday, depending on when you're listening to this. We're going to have much more on the Combine in tomorrow's show because I do think for where the Pelicans are, it is shaping up really nicely for them to get an impactful player and potentially even a starter. More on that in tomorrow's show. But the Pelicans are going to be there in force. Swin Cash, Trajan Langdon, Willie Green, David Griffin are all going to be at the Combine scouting these players because that's an important part, particularly in a small market where you're trying to build sustainable success. So, per The Athletic, Detroit has interest in Trajan Langdon. They want to hire a president of basketball operations who's going to be above their current general manager, Troy Weaver. And that person is going to probably make a determination on Monty Williams and his future and the state of that franchise anyway. They want to win right now. That's a team that we've really linked with Brandon Ingram, and I think would really be interested in him if that ownership mandate is win now. But nothing on that front's going to get done till they make this hire. So Trajan Langdon is linked to that. He's been linked to other jobs in the past as well. He might be the general manager of the team, but he's technically number 2 maybe, or he's below, let's say, David Griffin. This would be his chance to run his own shop and kind of run it as he sees fit. I think this would be a big loss to the New Orleans Pelicans. Truthfully, I think this would be a big loss to the New Orleans Pelicans because I think Trajan Langdon has done a very good job here. He has a variety of roles, but one of the things he does is a lot of scouting, helping with the drafting of players, working on some of the trades and things like that as well. The scouting, whether it's domestic or international, is something that he really focuses on. And that means he's going to have a lot of insight into the players that are at the combine right now. And this is a key moment for New Orleans. They need to make a decision on that Los Angeles Lakers pick. They could have it 17, punt it to next year's draft. They have their pick at 21, 2 picks in a weak draft. Is that the way that you want to go? But I do think in that 17, call it the 15 to 25 range, that 10 pick range, there's some real value to be had. Again, more on that in tomorrow's show. And the Pelicans could get a starting center in that spot as well. So if Trajan Langdon is doing a very good job scouting with all of that, that's really important. That's really important. And I think there's something to be said for a lot of continuity with that. And when you look at his tenure here, and when they have these kind of like nebulous front office roles, right? David Griffin's above the general manager. David Griffin is the executive vice president of basketball operations. Langdon is the general manager. Like, what's it mean in terms of job responsibilities? And that's something we don't really see. There's no transparency. Sorry, when it comes to stuff like that. But if you think they're kind of doing a good job, they kind of all get a lot of the credit with that. And I think that's something that's kind of goes on here. But you look at this team, I do think they've done a good job when it comes to drafting and discovering talent. You had that initial draft with Zion Williamson, Jackson Hayes, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Jackson Hayes was bad. Nickeil's developed into a good player, albeit not here, but was included in that CJ McCollum trade. But you also have Herb Jones, who we love. Trey Murphy, who we want to see as a starter, right, and think would do well as a starter. You have undrafted guys in Najee Marshall and Jose Alvarado that have done a really good job too. We like the potential for Jordan Hawkins and the potential for Dyson Daniels. We'll see about EJ Liddell in the future. But they've done a good job of drafting overall and developing some of that talent here too, or at least getting players in that we can look at and go, oh, they have a future. We look at that with the roster, right? Najee's going to get paid. He's not going to stay on the team. But to get the production they've had for him for, a number of seasons, I think is really something, right? This is a guy who over 4 years has played 230 games for the Pelicans, averaging 7.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 2 assists off the bench with at times tenacious defense and just winning plays. Jose Alvarado was their arguably the most impactful player in terms of being on the court versus off the court last season, right? Getting those undrafted guys, putting them on two-way deals, then getting them to the roster on very cheap contracts is a fantastic thing. Jose Alvarado has made barely over $3 million in the NBA, or maybe it's a little bit more than that at this point, but cheap, right? You need that in this market. He's made under $5 million. That's pretty impressive. They got a team option on him for $2 million next year, right? Najee Marshall gave you all of that production, and he's made how much in the NBA? He's made $5.5 million. That's cheap. That's cheap. Really good production and a significant role players for very cheap. Whether that was Trajan directly or just he had a hand and was involved in that, that's important. Now, they have Bryson Graham, who I would assume would be elevated to the general manager should Trajan Langdon leave, and that ensures some of that kind of continuity in the approach that they take. But Langdon has been very integral when it comes to all of this, and I think this would be a big loss. And now that you're going into, arguably, it's like every season, right? We would say this is the most pivotal offseason in Pelicans history, but it's also true every single year. Losing him in the midst of all of this, I think could be rough. Also, if he's I don't like Brandon Ingram, let's say, I don't know that he doesn't or not, would he, in his first move with the Detroit Pistons, want to be to trade for Brandon Ingram? How does that impact that, right? That's something to kind of consider too. So something to keep an eye on, because I do think losing Trajan Langdon could be a very big loss for the Pelicans, particularly at this stage where scouting's going on and you have someone who's very experienced with doing all of that. And that's something that's vitally important to a small market team or team that's never really going to have cap space to go big name hunting in free agency, which, by the way, doesn't really exist anyway. So I think that's an important thing, something to keep an eye on. There could be shakeups beyond just the roster here. It could be the front office, the coaching staff, and that's going to impact what the Pelicans do this offseason and the different directions that they could go in. So while we might focus on a Brandon Ingram trade, you could say these two pieces, James Borrego, Trajan Langdon, are just as important towards shaping what next season is going to look like. Speaking of next season, let's touch on a couple of things from the Combine, get you set with that, and we'll do a deeper dive later in the week as well when it comes to that. That's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. All right, today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more players and their stat projections, and then you watch the winnings roll in. So get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You get 4 things right, you win 100 times your money. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. PrizePicks is really simple to play. You can make your picks and put your entry in under 60 seconds. And with quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and enormous selections of players and stat types, that's what makes PrizePicks the #1 fantasy sports app. So download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's a first deposit match up to $100 when you download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with PrizePicks. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We are the #1 Pelicans podcast coming to y'all like nobody else does, looking at the impact of stuff off the court, on the court. We're going to get into a lot of the draft stuff because, look, the Pelicans could move up, which means we're going to have to kind of scout some of the top players here. They might have the 17th pick. They for sure will have the 21st pick unless they trade it. All of these things are in play, which makes this the most pivotal offseason in Pelicans history here. We're going to cover it all like nobody else will. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join, hopefully, when I say this, 10,000 Pelicans fans. That's an insane number to me as we just cover the Pelicans here. It's really cool to be a part of this community, and I feel honored every day to host the show. I really mean that. And consider joining the Pelicans community mock draft. I have the link down below so you can fill that out and let me know if you're interested in there. It's a lot of fun. So that's going to be something that we're going to be doing here as well. And live show Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central. And I'll answer your questions, some of your questions after the fact as well in a bonus segment. We'll look at a Brandon Ingram trade since that'll be the Thursday show technically. So that's going to kind of get to our trade target Thursdays this off season. So let's switch gears for a minute. We've talked about the coaching staff, the front office here. But what's also going to be important for the team this year is the draft. And the Combine's going on in Chicago right now. They're doing kind of all the measurables and things like that. You'll get some team interviews and things like that. I want to remind you all right now, this is like disinformation season, misinformation season. Everyone is throwing different things out there. We're going to try and make sense of what the rumors are and what it means to the Pelicans. But right now, I don't think much is happening. I think everyone is waiting to kind of scout some of these players to build their big boards out a little bit more, at least finalize their big boards. And then you can start getting into some of the trade talk. But as we've said, the Detroit Pistons still haven't filled their top executive decision maker. They're not going to be involved in trade talks for Brandon Ingram until that happens, right? There's no way you would make that move while you're trying to hire someone who's the guy who should kind of approve or sign off or make that trade. So things are going to be a little bit quiet right now. So anytime you hear, this is the rumored deal, here's what we're talking about, there's nothing from that. There will be some truth in some things, but not for maybe another week or so or till a couple of things are finalized. And then once those dominoes fall, we can get even more into all of that because discussions will be happening this week. These guys are all, these people, I should say, are all at the Combine, right? They're all going to be talking. This is why the NBA changed the trade deadline to be before the All-Star break because otherwise deals would just get done during the All-Star break and you run into that very awkward situation but kind of awesome situation where DeMarcus Cousins was traded to the Pelicans and was like informed of it during his All-Star media availability. And it was like, oh, this is weird. So, then it was like finalized, right? During that, and he was playing in the game, but it's like, does he wear the Kings jersey? Like, what's he do here? So there's going to be a lot of rumors and things, but nothing's going to get set yet. But the seeds are being planted right now, but no one's talking super concrete things just yet, at least not until some of the other teams are eliminated from postseason contention and they're looking at what kind of upgrades they need to make or moves that they want to do, because everyone is going to try and get better, it feels like, this off season. I'll say this, looking at some of the measurables and more on this tomorrow, I think this draft is shaping up really well for the Pelicans. I think they're in a really good position this offseason. They've got to make big changes. We all agree with that, but I think they're going to be in a prime position to do so. You should be able to move Brandon Ingram for something that you want. And if it's not a center, I think you're going to be able to get one in this draft. There's a couple of guys. Kyle Filipowski from Duke maybe being the top name, looking really good for the Pelicans kind of in their pick range at 21. Even if they don't take that Lakers pick, I think you can probably get one of like 3 or 4 guys that are going to be there that I think could be impactful players, potential starters for the Pelicans too. And we'll look at some of that. And when you see some of the measurables on these guys and how they're comparing to some of the top players in this draft, there's value to be had later. This is not an elite draft, right? Alex Sarr's the number 1 pick, isn't close to the same tier as Victor Wembanyama was from last year. But tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 guys, those are guys that you probably look at as being like very solid role players or like low end starters. To grab your 4th or 5th starter at 21 in any draft, I think is a very good position to be in. And I think that's where you're looking at how things are shaping up to go for New Orleans right now. So this scouting process right now, the interviews, finding the measurables, how they fit with Zion and trying to figure all of that out is very important to this team right now. Some of the centers are very different. So what's your offense going to look like? What's the role that they're going to play? You need to make sure you get the right one for what you're doing here. And I think this is a draft where you go maybe at times for fit over top end talent. Get a guy who's just going to be able to play and help you right now. Worry about some of the future stuff 5-6 years from now. Let that figure itself out down the line. But New Orleans, I do feel, could be in a good position. You look at Filipowski, to use as an example, he's someone we'll talk about tomorrow, and look at his kind of measurables and how they compare. That's a good spot. Like, you're in a very good position when it comes to getting a guy that's going to make an impact and potentially be a starter or play like a role a la Derek Lively II did for the Dallas Mavericks this past year. And if you get that, you're thrilled. Lively was important and impactful for Dallas this year. Still is. And having a guy like that come in next year and play perfectly with Zion Williamson is exactly what you're looking for. Lively played 55 games, started 42 of them, gave you 8.7 rebounds and 1.4 blocks per game. Those are actually really good numbers for a rookie here. That's all you're looking for. Pass the ball a little bit too. That would be a great thing. You can get that kind of guy here, especially also someone who's athletic and kind of fits what this team does. You also have a couple guys, other big name centers, we'll talk about them tomorrow, that I think really could just be like, yeah, you got to take them here. And it's going to give you some of what you need. We'll look at that in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Pelicans. We'll start kind of threading some more draft coverage in between the trade talk and everything going on around this team. It's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join, hopefully, 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube. Join me in the community mock draft for Locked On Pelicans that we're going to do as well. And I'll see you on the live show Wednesday night. There'll be another show in the meantime. There'll be a show out Wednesday morning. Then Wednesday night, I record like the Thursday show, but I just post them early. So I will see you all Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central on the Locked On Pelicans YouTube page. Maybe we'll be doing a little bit of celebrating as well. So that's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'll be back with y'all tomorrow.